Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. Sometimes love doesn't arrive wrapped in roses and sunlight. Sometimes it comes drenched in rain and marked by a single bullet. This is the story of Isla Bennett, a quiet art restorer who thought she was invisible to the world until the night she threw herself in front of a stranger to save his life. She didn't know his name. She didn't know the blood on his shirt belonged to men who had tried to kill him. All she saw was the look in his eyes, cold, commanding, and heartbreakingly alone. But fate, as always, has a cruel sense of humor. The man she saved was no ordinary man. He was Dominic Vale, a man whose fortune was built on secrets and whose soul was steeped in sin. As their worlds collide, between love and betrayal, mercy and madness, they'll discover that sometimes the heart chooses the most dangerous person to love. Because some connections aren't written in ink, they're written in gunfire, blood, and the desperate hope of redemption. Tonight, we bring you a story of passion, danger, and impossible love. Fate bleeds between our hearts. The rain in Chicago that night fell like fragments of glass, sharp and steady, sluicing neon into puddles that swallowed the sidewalks. Isla Bennett moved through it with the practiced hush of someone used to working with delicate things. In her arms, she carried a rolled canvas, its edges wrapped in brown paper, a century-old landscape she'd been painstakingly restoring at the museum. She kept her head down against the drizzle, boots tapping a rhythm on the wet pavement, thinking of nothing more dangerous than the varnish she'd left to set. Two black SUVs idling across the street broke that calm with the mechanical menace of hunting animals. Engines purred. A streetlight blinked. Isla slowed, sensing the small animal instinct that had always served her in quiet rooms full of fragile artwork, the instinct to notice things before they notice you. Then gunfire split the air, sudden and terrible. Metal on metal. And the world turned to motion. A flash of muzzle, a scream of tires, a man collapsing into the gutter like someone finally answering a question he'd been asked for years. He was large enough to look dangerous, even bleeding, tall with shoulders that filled the doorway between life and something else. Rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead. His shirt was blooming red where the bullet had found him. For a second, Isla only saw motion, hands scrabbling at a wound, someone yelling orders from the shadow of the SUVs. But the next second, she saw the man's face, and the rest of the street fell away. His eyes were an odd, winter kind of steel, cold, precise, and refusing to let him be merely a victim. There was no panic there, only a raw, steady command that unsettled her more than the bullets. "Get back," he said, voice stripped raw by pain and rain. But it carried the same authority his eyes had. He tried to push himself up. A coughing spasm doubled him over. A second flash of light marked another gun's report, close, and the street answered with a single metallic echo. Isla could have obeyed. She should have obeyed. The sensible part of her, the part that cataloged pigments and temperature and the slow, safe rhythms of the studio, told her to run, to call, to hide. Instead, something in her moved before thought did. She dropped the canvas like a shield and lunged. Not a heroic rush, not the wild bravado of cinema. It was a quick, precise motion of someone used to preventing breakage, applied now to flesh. Her shoulder met the bullet's path first. Pain erupted, hot, bright, immediate. Then the world pivoted, the rain turning the sting into a ribbon of heat that traveled down her arm. She hit the pavement hard enough to knock breath out of her, and for a heartbeat, all she registered was the taste of iron and the soft thud of her heart misbehaving against her ribs. Strong hands were beneath her in an instant, hauling her back from the gutter with such force that the breath came back in sharp, angry pulls. The man's fingers pressed against her wound, fingers that smelled faintly of rain and leather and something else she couldn't name, cologne or diesel. The sort of clean, hard smell that belongs to people who never learn to let themselves be soft. "Stay with me," he said, and the word struck her like a vow and a plea tangled together. "Stay with me, Angel." He used the word as if it were both accusation and benediction. Her mind, stubbornly practical even as it blurred, tried to gather details. The angular scar at his temple, the expensive cut of the coat he'd shed, a hand bracelet of scars along one knuckle. She tried to answer, tried to tell him she was okay, tried to ask who he was. But the rain and the pain and the sudden narrowing of the world into the timbre of his voice made words fragile things. Instead, she focused on the weight of him over her, the steadiness of his breathing, the ache that bloomed where the bullet had passed. Desperate, human gratitude and the odd intimacy of being held in another person's hands pressed against her like a foreign language she almost understood. Around them, the city blurred into sirens and light, and the murmur of people pushed to the edges of the scene. Voices shouted, a phone somewhere sparked to life, and then the SUVs peeled away into the night, tire spray arching like the end of a sentence. The man's face hovered above hers, rain tracking cold rivers down his cheekbones. He didn't ask her name. Instead, he kept his palm firm over her wound, as if to pin her to the present. There was authority in the way he leaned in, a possession that felt dangerous and necessary at once. When darkness came at the edges of her vision, it was gentle, not abrupt, like a curtain lowering on a stage before the next act. His voice lingered there as the rain grew louder, steady as an oath. "Don't you dare go," he warned, softer now, as if he trusted that even the faintest spark of defiance in her would fight to clench. "Stay with me." And in that fragile, violent moment between breaths, with the city's lights smeared into watercolor and the canvas she'd dropped forgotten in the gutter, Isla found herself tethered to a stranger who smelled of gunpowder and rain, and to a fate she had not chosen. Consciousness returned like a slow wave, dragging her back to shore. Isla felt warmth first, smooth satin beneath her palms instead of rain-slick concrete. Her shoulder ached, but there was no fire anymore, only a dull pressure wrapped carefully by expert hands. When her eyes blinked open, the world wasn't flashing sirens and stormwater. It was a palace. White marble veined with gold anchored a room so bright and clean that it hardly felt lived in. A chandelier spilled light across glass doors leading to a balcony hovering above the Chicago skyline, morning clouds rolling lazily past. She inhaled sharply. Nothing about this fit the chaos she remembered. Then footsteps, soft but controlled, approached from her left. Dominic Vale stood there, changed yet unmistakable. Gone was the soaked shirt clinging to a bleeding wound. He now wore a dark suit molded perfectly to every angle of his frame, his hair neatly brushed back. If she hadn't felt the agony of that bullet, she could have convinced herself she imagined the alley. He regarded her quietly, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "You're safe," he finally said, voice lower, calmer, but still with that same command that shook her bones in the rain. "You were lucky. Another inch and that bullet would have..." He cut himself off, jaw tightening as if the idea offended him personally. "I'm glad you're awake." Isla pushed herself upright too fast, and dizziness punished her for the attempt. "Where am I?" she managed, scanning the room again for an anchor of familiarity. "My penthouse," he replied simply, as though that were a perfectly normal sentence to say to a stranger who saved your life. Her heart jumped. The kind of penthouse that only existed in magazines, dripping with old money and power. "Why?" she asked, and the word tasted sharp on her tongue. Dominic stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back like he was presenting a business proposal. "You intervened last night. You got hurt because of me. I had you brought here to ensure you got proper medical treatment." A doctor in a tailored lab coat appeared, adjusting a monitor and inspecting her bandage without a word. Isla watched them both with growing unease. "A hospital would have worked," she said. Dominic didn't flinch. "Hospitals ask questions, and the men who attacked me don't leave loose ends. You staying anywhere public would have been a death sentence." It was only then she noticed. No cell phone, no bag, no familiar belongings. Her breath stumbled. "Where's my phone?" "Secured," he answered, tone crisp like a door shutting. "I can't risk anyone tracking you." Or contacting you. That word, can't, stung more than her shoulder. Isla's pulse quickened. So what, I'm a prisoner, she demanded, heat rising in her cheeks. Dominic's eyes held hers, a hurricane disguised as calm water. I'm protecting you, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Protection isn't locking someone up, Isla countered. Protection doesn't remove choices. He studied her face, his own expression smoothing into something almost regretful, but still unyielding. If you walk out of this building, they will find you, and they won't hesitate a second time. The truth in his voice terrified her more than the possibility he was lying. She swallowed hard. Who are you? Dominic let out a faint exhale that might have been a laugh in another life. Most people think I'm a businessman. Venture capital, global investments. He sat on the edge of her bed, close enough for her to feel the gravity of him. That's only part of the story. She waited. He didn't elaborate. Instead, what matters is that I owe you. You shouldn't have been pulled into this. Silence pressed heavy between them. Isla tried to steady her breathing. I didn't jump in front of a bullet for repayment, she whispered. I thought someone was in danger. You didn't think, he corrected, voice soft but sharp. You acted? It's rare to see someone that brave. His gaze lowered briefly to her bandaged shoulder, and when it returned to her face, there was something gentler there, dangerously gentle. She should have been afraid. Maybe she was. But there was another current beneath it. Curiosity, unwilling fascination, the same pull that made her step forward last night instead of back. And that terrified her most. How long do I have to stay? She asked, trying to ground herself in practical questions. Until I'm sure the threat is gone, Dominic said. A few days, a week? I'll handle it. You'll handle it, she repeated, voice barely controlled. Just like that? And what am I supposed to do while I'm trapped in your luxury cage? Dominic tilted his head, almost amused. Recover, rest, heal. He stood again, and his presence filled the room even more from a distance. You saved my life. I intend to return the favor, even if you don't like the method. There was something haunting in the way he looked at her then, as if he was trying to memorize her, or maybe trying to decide whether saving her was already a mistake. Isla's voice dropped to a whisper. I should have just walked away. Dominic's expression hardened, like she'd struck a hidden nerve. But you didn't, he replied. And that choice binds us now. He stepped toward the door, guards already shadowing the hallway outside. His hand paused on the frame. He didn't look back when he said, quieter, almost human. Safety doesn't always look like freedom, Isla. The lock clicked softly, final as judgment. The penthouse glittered around her, gold trim, velvet chairs, art worth fortunes, yet the weight of invisible bars pressed in from every corner. She sank back into the pillows, breath trembling. Last night she saved a life. Today, that life belonged to the most dangerous man she'd ever meet. And now, whether she liked it or not, her life belonged to him too. Isla learned quickly that silence in this place carried weight. The penthouse, with all its marble and gold, had the unsettling quiet of a museum after hours. Beautiful, but wrong. She had spent 2 days wrapped in that stillness, healing, watching the skyline shift through floor-to-ceiling windows, feeling like a relic locked behind glass. Dominic visited often but never long, always leaving just when she found the courage to demand more answers. Recover first, he would say. The rest will make sense soon. He didn't understand that the unknown was its own kind of wound. She began to notice things. Men in black suits rotated shifts outside her door, never speaking but always listening. When they communicated, it was through short-coded taps on earpieces or silent hand signals she couldn't decipher. Once, when she passed the hallway to the elevator, she saw 2 guards inspecting a metal case lined with guns, sleek, matte black, designed for killing without leaving fingerprints. The gravity of it hit her then. This wasn't security. This was a small army. At breakfast on the 3rd day, Dominic received a phone call that fractured the illusion he'd tried to maintain. He switched seamlessly into Italian, sharp consonants cutting through the air like knives. Isla didn't know the language, but she didn't have to. His tone said everything. Nessuna pietà, he hissed. No mercy, a pause. Then, eliminate the leak. The command was delivered with chilling precision, void of hesitation. Dominic Vale didn't just lead men, he owned their fear. And when he hung up, he exhaled with the ease of someone who had simply rescheduled a meeting, not someone who had ordered someone's death. That was the moment she understood. Dominic wasn't protecting her from danger. He was the danger. Yet strangely, every time he spoke to her, the brutality slipped behind something softer, concern masquerading as obligation, a fierce protectiveness that didn't make sense for two people who met by accident. Isla found herself studying him during their brief interactions. The quiet tension in his shoulders, the shadows beneath his eyes, the way he paused as if calculating the safest version of himself to show her. Guilt? Fear? Loneliness? She couldn't decide which was the truest part of him. But answers came from the shadows, not from Dominic himself. One night, restless and craving truth like oxygen, she slipped into the corridor after confirming the guards had stepped away for their rotations. The penthouse library was dimly lit, books rising in towering shelves like walls of unspoken history. Her curiosity tugged her deeper until she noticed a drawer slightly ajar beneath an antique desk. Inside lay a small leather-bound notebook, scorched along the edges as though it had survived fire. She hesitated only a second before opening it. Numbers, initials, and obscure markings filled the pages, rows of coded entries, dates paired with names she didn't recognize. Some letters were circled in red, VV, recurring again and again, always beside the same symbol, a crown inverted. At the back of the book, the ink blurred where smoke had kissed the page, but one line remained legible. Un tradimento nella famiglia uccide due volte. A betrayal in the family kills twice. A shiver cut through her. Her fingers brushed a photograph tucked between pages. Dominic, younger, standing beside a powerfully built man with the same eyes, only warmer. His father, she assumed. Both looked proud, untouchable, alive. The burn marks crawled dangerously close to their faces, like the past trying to erase them. Curiosity can be deadly in this house. She froze. Dominic's voice drifted from the doorway, quiet but serrated. When she turned to face him, he wasn't angry, just exhausted, like a man tired of burying ghosts. He stepped forward slowly, gaze locked onto the notebook like it was a living threat. You shouldn't be up, he said, though the concern threaded beneath his words betrayed him. She held the notebook closer to her chest. What is this? He exhaled, and the darkness softened. Something that shouldn't exist, he answered. That book belonged to my father. Isla kept her stance defensive. Why hide it? Because inside those pages, he replied, voice dropping to a low, unsteady rumble, is the name of the man who murdered him. The room didn't move, but it felt like the world shifted under her feet. Isla looked at the ink again, coded, burned, concealed. You think someone in your family did this, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Dominic's gaze flickered, grief and fury warring beneath the surface. I know they did, he said. My father was the head of the Vale Syndicate. Not just a businessman, he controlled an empire of power, alliances, debt, and fear. Someone wanted his crown, someone close. She stared at him, the truth stitching itself into a shape too massive to ignore. You're not just protecting me, Dominic, she breathed. You're using me. He stepped closer, expression shadowed with honesty so severe it hurt to look at. You saw the bullet coming, he said, but you still saved me. You don't think, Isla, you feel, and you see details others miss. That notebook, it's nearly destroyed. I've spent years trying to decode what's left. And you want me to help you fix it, she finished for him, fingers tightening on the burned leather. Dominic nodded. You're the only person who can. She almost laughed, bitter, breathless. So this isn't a gilded prison, she said quietly. It's a workshop. His voice softened into something dangerously confessional. I don't trust people, he said. They always want something. Money, power, my downfall. His eyes found hers, holding them like they were a lifeline. You wanted nothing from me. That makes you the only one I can trust. It should have sounded like manipulation. It should have sounded like a trap. But beneath the steel and dominance, she heard truth. Broken truth. Against better judgment, against fear and sense, Isla nodded. Show me what you know, she said. A silence eased between them, heavy with unspoken promises and consequences neither of them understood yet. Dominic reached out, not touching, but asking permission without words, and she handed him the notebook. Their fingers brushed. Static. Heat. Something inevitable sparking to life. In that moment, Isla stepped across an invisible line. Not a prisoner anymore. Not a witness. She had become part of the darkness itself. And she didn't know if she'd ever find her way back to the light. Trust formed slowly between Isla and Dominic. Not through promises, but through the many hours they spent bent over the charred notebook together. Each moment they shared chipped away at the fear that once defined them. Isla found herself no longer viewing Dominic solely as the ruthless figure who commanded armed guards and spoke about death with cold finality. There were flashes where the armor slipped, where the powerful leader of the Veil Syndicate looked like a man carrying scars too heavy for one heart. As she carefully examined the nearly destroyed pages, he watched her like she was the only person in the world who might understand him. In the steady glow of library lamps, the rain tapping the glass behind them, she saw the loneliness etched into his features. He told her more about the past while she worked, voice low, as if saying the words too loud would make the memory explode all over again. His father was killed when Dominic was 22. Car bomb. Professionally done. No evidence left behind except a coffin draped in syndicate colors. One moment he had a mentor, a leader, a parent. The next, Dominic was the head of an empire designed for men twice his age and twice as hardened. Fearful allies, hungry enemies, every one of them testing his strength. He never got time to grieve. Power and death arrived holding hands. Isla understood then. Dominic didn't choose the darkness. He inherited it, consumed by it before he even knew he had a choice. And in some strange, aching way, that truth pulled her toward him rather than away. She noticed how he paid attention to her pain. Subtle things like making sure she had a pillow for her arm, or pausing their work the moment her breathing hitched. He tried to hide these gestures, as if kindness was a weakness he couldn't afford to show. But Isla saw it all and felt something dangerous spark inside her. Perhaps even he didn't realize how much he cared. There were moments when he'd lean over her shoulder to read a note she was deciphering, and his voice would brush against her neck, warm and accidental. She told herself the shiver was just nerves, fear lingering in the body, but deep down she knew it was something else entirely. And whenever she caught him looking at her, really looking, he didn't glance away fast enough. It wasn't desire alone, it was recognition. A connection neither of them had asked for, but both felt pulling tighter every day. One night, the code frustrated her. The burn marks erased too many letters, and Isla let out a sharp exhale as disappointment thudded through her chest. Dominic took the notebook from her, but instead of blaming her failure, he paused, thumb tracing one charred corner gently, as though it was a relic of the man he loved most. That tenderness contradicted every deadly command she'd overheard him give. "Your father must have trusted someone enough to write this," she said. Dominic shook his head. Trust is how he died. For the first time, she heard not anger, but pain, buried deep and rarely allowed to breathe. She touched his hand before she even realized she'd moved. It wasn't bold, just a quiet reminder that he wasn't facing this alone. He stared at their joined hands like he couldn't remember the last time someone reached out to him without fear or agenda. The storm outside cracked loudly, thunder vibrating through windows, and Isla flinched, instinctively leaning into him. Dominic's arm slipped around her, protective and steady. They froze, breaths tangled, both aware of the line they were standing on. When she looked up, his face was close enough that she saw the exhaustion in the tiny lines around his eyes, and the vulnerability he tried so hard to bury. "You don't have to be the monster they expect," she whispered. Those words seemed to carve into him like truth he'd never dared to voice. And then, slowly, like a decision he knew would change everything, Dominic leaned in. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, filled with all the hesitation of two people who knew this was dangerous. But when Isla's hand rose to his jaw, he deepened it, a quiet hunger breaking loose. It wasn't a clash of violence and want. It was a surrender. Of walls, of fears, of everything he'd sworn he'd never feel again. When they finally parted, Dominic rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard like he'd just survived something rather than indulged in it. "I shouldn't," he said, voice ragged. "You could hate me tomorrow." Isla brushed her thumb over his cheek, grounding him. "Then I'll hate you tomorrow," she murmured. "But not tonight." He closed his eyes as if those words soothed wounds she couldn't see. He kissed her once more, softer this time, like a promise he wasn't ready to speak aloud. Later, as he walked her back to her room, his fingertips lingered in hers until the last possible moment. He looked at her with a battle in his eyes. Man versus monster, heart versus bloodline, love versus survival. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "don't forget that I tried." Isla didn't understand at first, but she nodded anyway, feeling something shift in the air around them, like fate had just rewritten itself. When the door closed behind him, she pressed her fingers to her lips, heart still racing. She knew this was reckless. She knew the world Dominic lived in didn't allow happy endings. But she also knew one undeniable truth. Beneath the violence, beneath the shadows and the sins, Dominic Vale still had a soul, and somehow, impossibly, it was reaching for hers. Love had begun to feel like a dangerous secret they shared. One that tasted of stolen breath and quiet truths. One that had no right surviving inside a world built of bullets and blood. Isla didn't know when her heart had crossed that irreversible line, but there was no denying it now. Dominic Vale, the man she should have feared most, was the very person she was starting to trust, and maybe that was the most reckless decision of all. Days bled into each other as they worked side by side on the damaged notebook. There was something comforting in the routine. His low voice explaining details of the syndicate she never would have learned otherwise. The way he watched her thoughts unravel as she decoded patterns in the text. The warmth of his presence nearby, always too close and never close enough. Her shoulder was healing, and Dominic insisted she only focus on the restoration work. He didn't pressure her for more intimacy, but that tension, restless and alive, never left the space between them. It waited, simmering, like lightning waiting for the next strike. One evening, the city was wind-slashed and restless outside the towering windows. The glow of the desk lamp illuminated the newest page Isla had carefully treated. Char marks peeled back, ink stabilized. She held her breath as she read, eyes scanning the bottom corner of the page. A name, almost erased but impossible to mistake now. V. Vale. Her pulse leaped. She lifted her gaze slowly, afraid to break the moment. "Dominic," she said, voice tight with caution. "I think you need to see this." He leaned in, calm at first, until his eyes locked on the name. Everything inside him changed. His entire frame went rigid, pupils sharpening like a predator who had just found its target. He didn't speak. For a long time, he just stared, silent, still, terrifyingly unreadable. Isla touched his hand carefully. "Who is Vincent Vale?" she asked gently. Dominic's breath left him like someone had knocked the wind from his lungs. "My brother," he said, almost in disbelief. "Vincent is my older brother. Older brother. Same bloodline, same legacy, same empire. The betrayal cut deeper because it didn't come from an enemy. It came from the only family Dominic had left." Isla swallowed, dread curling deep in her stomach. "Dominic, did Vincent—" "Yes," he hissed before she could finish. "He was there when Father died. He was the one who insisted Father step inside the car first." Dominic rose from the chair, steps slow at first, then pacing, shadows twisting around him like something alive. "And every attack on me since... every leak, every ambush." His hands balled into fists. "It all makes sense now." She stood and reached for him, but he pulled away, like fury was the only thing keeping him upright. "The man who should have protected me. The only person I trusted when my father died." He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. It was him, all this time. Isla's heart broke at the sound of his voice, raw, wounded, filled with the kind of pain that didn't heal clean. I'll kill him, Dominic vowed, voice low and shaking. I'll make him choke on what he did. No, Isla said sharply, stepping in front of him before he shattered completely. Dominic, listen to me. He murdered our father. He tried to murder me, he snapped. What justice exists if I let him breathe another day? If you do this, Isla whispered, eyes searching his, you become exactly what he believes you already are. His jaw clenched. It's not the same, isn't it? She challenged. What separates you from him, then? Just motive? She placed her hand over his heart. I've seen who you are here. You can choose a different path. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to believe her more than anything. His anger didn't vanish, but it bent, softened, shaped into something quieter, something far more dangerous than rage. I don't know how to stop hating him, Dominic admitted. You don't have to stop, Isla said, but don't let the hate own you. His eyes locked onto hers, stormy and vulnerable. Then his forehead fell gently to hers, as if she was the only lifeline keeping him from drowning. You make me want a world I don't deserve. His voice broke, barely audible. And that terrifies me. Isla held him there, fingers gripping his shirt like she could anchor him to this moment, to them. And when he kissed her again, it wasn't fire and hunger like before. It was desperate and aching, a plea buried in tenderness. For the first time, Dominic Vale kissed like a man who needed saving. Later that night, sleep tugged at Isla's heavy eyelids. Dominic insisted she rest while he continued pacing the library, lost in thought. She kissed his cheek softly before leaving, a promise without words that she'd be there when the storm in his heart calmed. She didn't notice the quiet shift in the penthouse until it was too late. The lights dimmed unexpectedly as she walked down the hall. The guard usually stationed at her door was gone. Unease prickled beneath her skin. Just as she turned to go back toward the library, a cold hand clamped over her mouth. A voice whispered into her ear, elegant and venomous. Sweet Isla, you've become quite the distraction. Fear exploded in her chest as she struggled, but the grip tightened. A familiar cologne lingered in the air, expensive, sharp, dangerously charming, Vincent Vale. Let's take a little trip, he murmured, dragging her back into the dark, his tone mocking and delighting in her terror. We wouldn't want Dominic to forget who truly controls this game. Everything spun into chaos. The world dissolved into black. Dominic finally rushed into the hallway moments later, the echo of a door slamming triggering panic he'd never felt before. Isla, he called, voice cracking. The guards were gone. The cameras were dead. And on the polished marble floor, a single message was carved viciously into the wall. Blood always rises to the top. For the first time since his father died, Dominic Vale felt truly powerless. And somewhere in the city's shadows, Vincent Vale smiled, because he knew he had just found the perfect way to break his bro. Dominic had never known silence like this, the kind that screamed louder than gunfire, the kind that felt like loss breathing down his neck. Isla was gone, snatched from the one place he believed he could keep her safe. And the words carved into the wall echoed like a curse he'd been running from his entire life. Blood always rises to the top. His brother had returned from the grave Dominic built for him in his mind, and he'd taken the only person Dominic could not afford to lose. Rage alone would have burned the world down, but fear was new. Fear changed everything. Isla woke to the smell of rust and river water. Her wrists burned where zip ties cut into her skin, and the floor beneath her was cold metal. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she recognized the setting instantly. An abandoned warehouse near the Chicago River. Pipes dripped overhead, and the tide slapped against steel outside. She sucked in a shaky breath but forced herself to stay calm. Panic never saved anyone. She could almost hear Dominic's voice in her head. Control the fear before it controls you. She wasn't sure when his voice had become her anchor. Footsteps scraped the concrete. Vincent Vale emerged from the shadows with a smile that curdled her blood. Taller than Dominic. Sharper features. Same eyes, except his were carved from ice, not fire. Look who's finally awake, he drawled, crouching beside her. I was beginning to think my men hit you too hard. Isla glared. "What do you want from me?" His laugh was quiet, twisted. "Don't flatter yourself, sweetheart. You're leverage, nothing more." He gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "My little brother lost everything the night our father died. Respect, power, family." He clawed his way back, and still, it wasn't enough. His voice dipped lower, venom dripping. "So now, before he loses his empire again, I'll take the last thing he cares about." Her breath hitched, and he saw it. Oh, he loved that he saw it. "I see it in your eyes," he murmured. "You care for him. That makes you useful." "He'll kill you," Isla said, surprising herself with how steady it came out. Vincent smirked. "Let him try. I've been waiting years to bury him beside Daddy." He rose, pacing slowly, the gun at his hip catching the light. "Dominic thinks love is a weakness. Funny, isn't it? Because now that weakness leads him straight into my hands." His tone turned almost conversational. "You'll be the message he never forgets." He shoved her into a chair, binding her ankles. Isla forced her mind to race, not through fear, but strategy. Dominic would come. Of course he would. And Vincent planned to kill him the moment he walked through the door. She needed help, fast. But she had nothing. No phone, no tools, until she remembered something. Nina. Nina always insisted on the emergency smartwatch Isla hated wearing. She had forgotten to take it off when she dressed earlier. It was still on her wrist under the restraint. A thin spark of hope flicked to life. While Vincent barked orders to his men across the warehouse, Isla tapped the edge of her watch against the chair leg, activating the voice message function. She spoke through tight lips, keeping her voice low. "Stuck on a project, Patri," she whispered. To anyone else, nonsense. But Nina would know. Patri was short for Patria, an old shipping district they visited once for a restoration project. If Nina was paying attention, if she saw it in time, Vincent returned before Isla could send more. "You look busy," he said dryly. She quickly lowered her hands, masking the gesture with a cough. "Just trying to make myself comfortable before you kill me." "Kill you?" Vincent grinned. "Not yet. Not until I hear him scream." He extracted his phone and hit a single button. Somewhere across Chicago, Dominic's phone rang. Dominic answered instantly. "Where is she?" The voice that left him was not the man Isla knew. It was the syndicate heir, forged in pain and vengeance. Vincent smirked at Isla, putting the call on speaker. "Little brother," he purred. "It's been too long." Dominic's silence was lethal. "If you touch her, you'll what?" Vincent interrupted. "Shoot me? Burn another piece of our family to ash?" He leaned in toward Isla, and she made herself meet Dominic's invisible gaze. "Come alone," Vincent whispered, "or she dies crying your name." A click ended the call. Isla felt her heart sink as Vincent pocketed the phone. "He'll come for you," she said. "He always does." Vincent tilted his head. Exactly. Across the city, Dominic stood still for the first time in his life and felt utterly out of control. His guards waited for orders, but there were none he could give. This wasn't a negotiation. This was war, family war, and he was walking directly into a trap. He pressed both palms on the marble desk, trying to steady the storm in his chest. One truth pulsed louder than everything else. He could lose her. He grabbed his gun, loading the magazine with muscle memory, each click a vow carved from his bones. He holstered a second weapon at his ankle. He refused backup. Vincent wanted him alone? Fine. The devil himself would walk through that warehouse door tonight, and the devil never begged. Before leaving, Dominic paused at Isla's desk, ink marks still fresh from her fingertips. He closed his eyes once, just once. Then he whispered, "Hold on for me." Back at the warehouse, Isla tugged subtly against her restraints, testing for weakness. None yet. Vincent tapped his watch as though waiting for a countdown. "You know," he mused, "Dominic always believed he could outrun what he is. What we are." He leaned closer, lips near her ear, but blood always remembers. She met his gaze, voice unwavering. "So does conscience." Vincent's smile died just as footsteps echoed outside. Slow, sure, fatal. The metal door rattled as wind blasted off the river. The guards raised their rifles. Darkness stretched long and trembling. Then, a single voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. Let her go. Dominic had arrived, and hell came with him. Dominic entered the warehouse with a cold and measured stride, every sense sharpened by a fear he would never admit out loud. The flickering overhead lights cast long, jagged shadows across metal crates and rusted beams, but the only thing his mind could truly see was Isla, struggling against restraints, breath uneven, eyes still blazing with the stubborn will to live. Vincent's gun pressed harshly at her ribs as he smirked at his younger brother's arrival, his grip dripping with arrogance and the power he thought he finally held. "Right on time," Vincent taunted, voice full of venom disguised as elegance. Dominic didn't waste a breath on pleasantries. "Let her go," he demanded, walking closer, each movement precise. Vincent laughed, a humorless sound. "Oh no, nothing about this is just between us." He dragged Isla closer, forcing her against him like a trophy stolen from a rival. "You always got everything." His praise, his affection, the privilege of being the redeemed son. His smile twisted darker. "And why?" "Because you lied better." Dominic's jaw tensed. "I protected you," he said, voice rigid steel. "Every day of our lives I protected you." Vincent's eyes flared. "Then look how that turned out." He leaned forward, practically whispering into Isla's ear while glaring straight at Dominic. "Father crowned you before he died. He chose you, and because of that, oh, little brother, he had to go." The truth landed like a bullet to the heart. Dominic's voice cracked beneath the weight of betrayal. "I protected you all my life, and you killed our father." Vincent's answer was a chilling whisper. "Because he loved you more." The first gunshot screamed through the warehouse. Metal screamed, Isla screamed. Chaos exploded instantly. Dominic dove behind a steel column as bullets sparked against concrete. Vincent yanked Isla backward, using her as a human shield, dragging her across the loading dock. Dominic fired only when Isla dropped low enough for him to risk a shot. But Vincent kept her pinned close, laughing between gunshots like this was a game designed for his victory. Isla's wrists burned against the restraints, but fear sharpened her focus. She waited. 1 breath, 2, 3. She felt the shift in Vincent's stance, the slight loosening of his grip as he tried to reposition. That was all she needed. Isla slammed her heel down as hard as she could, right onto his foot. Vincent shouted in pain, grip faltering. Isla threw her weight forward, creating the single opening Dominic needed. His finger squeezed the trigger, 1 shot. Clean, precise, fueled by every nightmare Vincent had ever created. Blood blossomed across Vincent's chest. His expression twisted, not in fear, but in disbelief. "You were supposed to die," he choked, voice weak. Dominic stepped closer, gun steady even as grief waged war inside his gaze. "I tried to save you," he said, voice shaking. "Even now." Vincent collapsed, breath shallow, eyes glassing over. "I'm the oldest," he gasped, as though that fact alone should have saved him from fate. Then the life drained from his face, and the war between brothers ended, not with power or triumph, just loss. But the danger was not finished. Oil barrels riddled with bullet holes began leaking. A spark from ricocheting metal ignited the spill, and flames slithered across the concrete floor like hungry serpents. Within seconds, fire climbed wooden beams and roared through the warehouse. The heat became suffocating. Metal groaned above them. Dominic stumbled as he reached Isla, his blood soaking through his shirt. Isla caught his weight, looping his arm over her shoulders. "You're bleeding," she said urgently. "We need to get you out now." "Not without you," Dominic growled, refusing to let pain bend his resolve. They moved toward the doors as fire swallowed the space behind them, their steps uneven but determined. A beam snapped overhead and crashed down where they had stood moments before. The world became a burning cage, every breath a battle. Dominic's strength faltered, knees threatening to buckle, but Isla pushed him onward with every ounce of power she had left. "Stay with me," she begged. "Don't you dare fall." The river wind blasted them as they burst out the side emergency door, just in time for a deafening explosion behind them. The warehouse erupted into a fireball, a shockwave throwing them both to the ground. Dominic shielded Isla as debris rained down, but the motion ripped agony through his injured side. Sirens wailed from every direction, police and medics drawn to the inferno lighting up Chicago's night sky. Isla's hands cupped Dominic's face as he lay on the pavement, eyes half-lidded from blood loss. She pressed her forehead to his, refusing to let fear win now. "I'm here," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm not leaving you." Dominic reached up, fingers brushing her cheek weakly, smearing soot across her skin. His voice was low but fierce, a vow cut from his soul rather than spoken. "You were never mine to lose," he breathed, "but I'll fight every damn day to keep you." His eyes fluttered closed, and Isla felt her own heart stutter. "No!" she choked, gripping his hand tighter. "You stay with me. You hear me? You stay." Paramedics rushed in, separating them just enough to treat his wound. Dominic's hand reached out blindly, searching again. Isla's fingers immediately threaded into his, refusing to let the world pry them apart. Police lights painted the river in streaks of red and blue, reflecting the chaos they had barely survived. But Isla saw only one thing. Dominic was alive. Alive because she fought, alive because he chose love over revenge. The man who once lived only for vengeance had risked everything to save her. And now, she would fight the world if that's what it took to save him back. As Dominic was lifted into the ambulance, their hands remained locked together until the very last moment the paramedics forced separation. Isla remained kneeling on the cold pavement, chest heaving, eyes locked on the vehicle carrying the only man who had ever made her feel both terrified and truly seen. This wasn't the end, not after everything they had burned for. The fire behind them might have consumed the Vale legacy, but it had also forged something new, something powerful enough to challenge fate itself. Love born in darkness doesn't die easily, and Isla Bennett wasn't going to let their story end in smoke. The sirens faded into the distance like a memory she couldn't quite hold on to, and when Isla opened her eyes again, the world was sterile white walls and the steady beep of a heart monitor. They told her she had passed out from exhaustion after Dominic was taken into surgery. They told her they found no body when the warehouse collapsed into the river. And they told her one more thing, one she refused to believe. Dominic Vale had vanished. Not dead, not alive, just gone. In the following days, news anchors and articles devoured the mystery. Vale Empire collapses after internal war. Criminal syndicate leader disappears. Feared dead. FBI cracks down on organized crime across Chicago. Isla watched it all from a hospital bed, feeling like she'd been cut out of her own story. The world was already filling in the blanks with lies. They didn't know the man who shielded her with his own body as fire swallowed everything. They didn't know the softness beneath the scars, or the way he whispered promises against her skin like she was the last real thing in his life. They only knew Dominic Vale, the ghost king of the syndicate. They would never know the man she kissed in the rain of burning ash. The FBI stepped in quickly, too quickly. Apparently, Dominic had been under investigation for years, and Isla was now the key witness to the most enigmatic disappearance in the city's criminal history. They couldn't let her go back to her old apartment, couldn't let her speak freely, couldn't risk retaliation from the syndicate remnants. "You're safe now," Agent Miller told her, sliding a protective detail file across the table. Safe. The word tasted like ash. Because safety didn't bring Dominic back. Safety was just a nice cage built out of good intentions. They moved her to a small suburban house. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, neighbors who waved like everything in the world was fine. And Isla tried. She tried to live as though this was a second chance she should be grateful for. Months passed. She reopened a tiny studio near the art museum, restoring cracked paintings and sacred artifacts with hands that still shook when thunder hit the windows. Her shoulder healed enough to carry the weight of her tools again, but the scar remained, an angry reminder of the night that changed everything. Sometimes her fingers drifted to it unconsciously, as if the wound itself remembered his touch. People assumed she was traumatized by violence. They didn't understand that her real pain was absence. She woke each morning expecting to find Dominic leaning in the doorway, arms folded, pretending he wasn't worried about her. She fell asleep each night whispering promises into the dark, promises he once made her swear to believe, and the dreams. God, the dreams. Every night she saw flames roaring around them, heat pressing against her skin as Dominic held her close. Sometimes he was alive beside her, fighting through the fire with that fierce determination in his eyes. Sometimes he was falling, blood soaking his shirt as he reached for her and slipped into darkness. And sometimes, worst of all, he stood in the fire untouched, looking back at her with a heartbreak so deep she woke gasping for air. In every version, he whispered the same thing. "Don't forget that I tried." She never did. But she also couldn't shake the fear that trying wasn't enough to save him. One afternoon, as sunlight cut through the dusty windows of her studio, Agent Miller came with an update. "The syndicate has fractured," he informed her. "Without Dominic or Vincent, it can't hold. Chicago is safer than it's been in decades." Isla nodded politely, staring at the half-restored canvas before her. "You helped end all of this," he added gently. "You should be proud, Isla." She smiled, but it wasn't real. Pride wasn't the feeling tightening around her heart. It was loss. It was wondering whether peace was worth the price of loneliness. It was missing the wrong person, and knowing it would never be right in anyone else's eyes. When Miller left, Isla closed the studio door and pressed her back against it, letting out a breath she'd held for months. The world believed Dominic was gone, and Isla wanted desperately to believe he had found freedom. Maybe somewhere far, where his past couldn't hunt him anymore. But in every heartbeat, she felt him still here. In the shadows of the city he once ruled, in the quiet moments when her hand brushed the scar on her shoulder, in the way her heart still stuttered at the sound of a low voice behind her, because love like theirs didn't burn away in a warehouse fire. It stayed, haunting, permanent. Isla Bennett survived the night Dominic Vale walked into her life, but she didn't survive him. Not really, and no matter what the world whispered, she knew their story wasn't over. Not yet. 6 months later, the rain in Seattle felt different from Chicago's storms. Softer. Gentle enough to be comforting, yet still heavy with a nostalgia Isla Bennett could never quite outrun. The city was a fresh chapter. Gray skies above, salt from the bay lingering in the air, strangers who didn't look at her like she'd crawled out of a tragedy. Here, no one whispered Vale Syndicate. No one saw her as the girl who survived the fire. She was simply Isla again, an artist with charcoal-stained fingers and eyes that held more history than she let slip. Her shop, Second Chance's studio, sat nestled between a tiny flower cafe and a bookstore specializing in forgotten classics. The sign above her door was hand-painted, strokes careful and imperfect, like a reminder that artistry and survival often shared the same hands. Every morning she unlocked the door, breathed in the comforting scent of oil paint and aged frames, and told herself she was healing. But healing wasn't the same as forgetting. She restored canvases for people who loved what they had lost. She stitched cracks in portraits and polished time-beaten frames. She handled broken things every day, and each one whispered a memory she was trying so hard not to chase. Dominic's absence was no longer loud. It had settled into a quiet ache beneath her ribs, persistent, patient, devastating in stillness. Some nights she still woke to the phantom of his touch, her name spoken like a vow against her skin. And some mornings she would pause before opening the shop, hand hovering over her chest as if she were trying to hold a heartbeat steady. The world believed he died a criminal. She remembered the man who shielded her from fire. It was late one afternoon when the bell above the door chimed, a soft, familiar sound that startled her more than it should have. Rain trailed in behind a tall figure wrapped in a black coat, collar raised high. His presence shifted the air before she even saw his face. He paused a moment at the threshold, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor. Then he lifted his eyes. Isla's breath caught painfully, the room spinning like her heart had just remembered how to beat. Dominic Vale stood there, alive, different. His hair slightly longer, beard shadowing his sharp jawline, eyes darker, deeper. Like he had carried hell on his back and made it out, but the way he looked at her, like she was the only reason he fought to return, that hadn't changed. "I heard you're good at fixing broken things," he said, voice low, threaded with hope and hesitation. Isla didn't move, didn't trust her lungs to work, didn't trust the universe not to rip him away again. Finally, her voice found its way through the storm inside her chest. "Not everything can be fixed." Dominic took a single step forward, closer, but not close enough to touch her. "Then maybe," he said gently, "we start over." Through the window, the rain began to fall harder, soft at first, then steady, then familiar. Like destiny echoing the night they first collided in Chicago. Isla realized she was smiling before she felt it on her lips. Not a smile of disbelief, or fear, or confusion. A smile of recognition, of survival, of love that refused to become a ghost. She rounded the counter, each step towards him slow and weightless, as though the ground might vanish if she moved too fast. When she reached him, Dominic let out a breath he'd been holding for 6 months. It trembled. Isla lifted her hand, touching his face like she needed confirmation that he was real flesh, not another dream. His eyes closed at the contact, relief softening the iron in his features. "You came back," she whispered. Dominic's voice cracked. "You were the only place worth coming back to." They didn't kiss, not yet. Love like theirs had burned once already. Now it needed to be built slowly, carefully, like a masterpiece restored from ruins. Dominic reached for her hand. Isla intertwined their fingers. No fear, no more running. When they stepped outside, rain drizzled over them in a soft curtain of silver. People hurried with umbrellas and jackets, but the world seemed to slow for the two of them, standing where the past and future met. Dominic glanced at her through the rain. "Are you sure?" Isla nodded. "I fix the art," she said. "Now, we fix us." They began walking side by side, shoulders brushing lightly. Not clinging, not holding too tight, just present, just free, and as the sky cried quietly, Isla's voice echoed in the soft dark. "Sometimes the bullet that breaks you is the one that brings you back to life, and that is where our story ends for now. A tale of fire, fate, and 2 hearts brave enough to fight their way back to each other. Thank you for walking every step of this journey with me. Through the storms, the bullets, and the love that refused to die. Your support means more than words can say. If you enjoyed A Bullet Between Two Souls, don't forget to like the video, comment your favorite moment, subscribe so you never miss the next story, because here, in this little corner of the world, love always finds a way back. See you in the next chapter.